Morning, David. How are you?
Not bad, mate. How are you?
Yeah, I'm really good, thank you, mate. Thanks for taking the time to speak with me again today. Since our first video, which was, I think, probably at the beginning of lockdown, so I don't know, 7, 8, 9 weeks ago, we've both had lots of positive feedback. I think between us, it's had over 15,000 views. So I want this really to be a bit of a follow-up from that. But also to coincide with a statistic that I read last week, which states that there's going to be a significant amount of players that are going to be out of contract come the end of June, and some of them are actually going to fall out of the game, fall out of the football sector. What's your thoughts on that initially, David?
I'd agree, Ben. I read somewhere myself, I think there's due to be maybe up to 1,400 players out of contract when the season does finally finish in the next month or two. They will find it difficult because a lot of football clubs, certainly in the lower tiers, have lost a lot of money with what's gone on with the pandemic, and it will certainly be moving forward. A lot of the football clubs will adopt a model now where they'll go for the younger players because they're cheaper, if you like. If you've got a 20, 21-year-old that's still living at home with his parents, he can, in the lower leagues, he can take £500-600 a week to stay as a full-time footballer. Whereas, you've got a 30-year-old guy that's got house, kids, mortgage, etc. So maybe if he's the only breadwinner, he can't sustain being on £500-600 a week as a full-time footballer, and so maybe got to go part-time and get a job to boost his earnings up. So one thing I would say is, just touching on my experience when I retired was, and I imagine, don't get me wrong, there will be a huge proportion still stay in the game, but there will be a good percentage that completely fall out the game out of that 1,400, and I'm fairly confident with that. When I retired, I felt like I lost my identity. When I was a footballer, I was David Bell, the footballer. I had an identity, I had a purpose, I had a vision. And then when I retired, I felt no self-worth in society, and I found it really, really tough to adjust to that. And one thing that I would say is, certainly for players that are going to go through that process, because some of them may already have things that have been bubbling in the background and they're ready to attack life in a different direction. I certainly wasn't, and a good proportion of these guys won't be ready to sort of move on to the next chapter, if you like. So for me, it would be a case of, you have got a purpose in society, and for potential employers, in terms of moving into a different sector, moving from professional sport into business, if you like, as we spoke about before. For employers, if you're looking at CVs, you're going to see ex-professional footballer, 10 years experience, no other qualifications, going for all different types of roles. You're probably going to cast their CV aside and think, well, they know nothing about the job I'm advertising for, so we'll just cast them aside. But from my perspective, and something that I've learned in my journey from transition, is footballers are easily coachable. They're very resilient. They're disciplined. They're competitive. They're driven. They're mentally strong. And what I mean by mentally strong, a lot of people in football have mental health problems, but when you think about being mentally strong, every footballer is mentally strong. For example, if you go to work this week, Ben, and have a bad week at work, come Saturday morning, you haven't got 25,000 people heckling you that you've had a bad week. You haven't got 25,000 people trolling you on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, calling you every name under the sun. You have a bad week at work Monday to Friday. You wake up Saturday morning and you say, right, well, I'll draw a line under that week and we'll go again Monday. So you have to be, you do build up resilience. You have to be mentally strong to be able to deal with that. Now, I know a lot of people do have mental health problems, and that's probably plays a big factor, when you're dealing with that day in, day out, year on year. But for me, they've got the players that will find themselves out of contracts and think, well, where do I fit in society now, and feel that they've lost their identity. They are highly employable people because of all the fundamentals that they've built through their football playing career. So for me, sort of to answer your question in summary, is for any potential employers for these players need to look at their CV with an open mind and say, well, what can they bring to our organisation? Well, they can bring discipline, resilience, drive, competitiveness, mentally strong. They're easily coachable. So all of those things. So when I look back academically, when I left school, Ben, I left with nothing. I'm talking, GCSEs, didn't leave with anything. And going on the journey that I've been on in terms of NEBOSH General Certificate, NEBOSH Construction Certificate, NEBOSH Diploma. And there's people that have been health and safety professionals for a number of years with extensive experience that go through that process and fail those exams. And I wasn't academically strong. But when I put my mind to it and my back was against the wall, for a better, for a better word or explanation to it, is I had no choice but to study, but to survive. That was my next chapter, but to provide for my family. So when you actually really want something, you can go and get it. And I suppose all those things that easily coachable, resilient, disciplined, competitive, driven, mentally strong, all those things have played a factor for me in gaining the qualifications that I've gained over the years. Because by rights, me going from 15-year professional football career and jumping into health and safety and going through those qualifications as I did, I had no right to do that. And I'm not here trying to sing my praises. Oh,
hello. Yeah, I know what you're saying there, David, but you've earned that right. So I love the sporting analogy the analogy between professional sport and business. Your hammy's gone, you're 1-0 up in the cup final with 10 minutes to go, and you're hanging in there because your back's up against the wall. That's your sporting analogy in terms of your next chapter. So you, and I'm saying this as your mate now, you may well say that, you didn't have any right to go and get that job, but you've made it your own, and you've excelled in such a short period of time because you were a professional footballer still 5 years ago. But just on that, PFA, surely they've got a responsibility to look after you, but even more so the players that retire early. But I would also imagine a chunk of these 1,000, 1,200 players that are going to be out of contract at the end of June, they've got an obligation to support them. Yeah or no?
100%. I agree 100%. Obviously, I've not sort of been involved in professional football now for a while. So in terms of exactly knowing what the PFA offer, in terms of players dropping out of the game, I wouldn't know is the honest answer. What I can tell you is sort of my journey and process since I retired, and I've not had one phone call from anybody at the PFA to say to me, Dave, how's life treating you after your football career?
Sorry, so you retired, you had to take early retirement because of injury, and you've never heard from the PFA since?
No, mate.
Oh, my days. So as you know, we're both friendly with Razor, and I don't know if you watched on Harry's Heroes, Lee Hendry. I mean, I watched that with a tear in my eye, just felt for him massively. But I don't think the PFA have helped Lee Hendry at all. I'm shocked at that, David. I don't know why, outside looking in, but I would have presumed that the PFA would have been there as a bit of a support mechanism for you, maybe give you some guidance in terms of what life looks like after football. Because if we go back one step, you were Westfield Rovers, went into Russian and Diamonds. Your life became football from such a young age, which you could argue may have been why you didn't perhaps do as well academically, at school, because it was football. And then for 24 years, if you say from the age of 6 when you was with Barry Fletcher at Westfield, all the way up to say 30 when you retired, and then it's just you just left then to the big wide world, and you've still got another 30, 35 years before you to continue to provide for your family. That's a bit, when you look at that, that's a bit scary.
It is scary, and like I say, in terms of commenting on what the PFA offer now, I couldn't comment on that. But just from, like I say, from my journey, other than the generic emails that every member of the PFA gets, no one's ever reached out to me on a personal level to say, well, what are you planning to do with the next chapter of your life? Do you need any support? Have you thought about going in this direction, etc.? So what I would say in terms of those players that will fall out of the game, the 1,400 that we've spoken about that will be out of contract, the percentage that do fall out of the game, I hope that there is support mechanisms in place, because a lot of them will feel no self-worth in society. A lot of them will feel that where do they belong in society now in terms of what is my next chapter? Because more so for the lower league players that haven't earned the astronomical money that you've
Haven't
got.
had that big contract.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
haven't got £500,000 in the bank to say, well, actually, I can go and plough myself into a 3-year degree, and not have to rely on any earnings. The reality is that they've probably got rent to pay, or a mortgage to pay, and maybe a car, whatever it may be. So they have to earn immediately. So I hope there is a support mechanism there, and I think America have got it pretty bang on in terms of, I watched a documentary not so long ago on LeBron James when he was sort of coming through high school and college. And one of the big things that they obviously do in America is, if you don't hit certain grade targets, you don't play. You don't play sport. And he was probably the biggest talent in America for his age, but he was in the same boat as everyone else. If he didn't hit a certain target, now I'm not talking that you have to be an A-star student, because some people just aren't academically strong. But there's a certain threshold that you have to hit. And if you apply yourself right, you can hit those thresholds irrespective of who you are. So I don't know, maybe it's a bit strong to say that we over here with maybe the PFA and football clubs need to adopt that approach, but certainly something needs to be done, because I listened to an interview with Arsene Wenger a little while ago, and this is a scary thought, and more so for younger players than your senior ones. Arsene Wenger said, if you're in an academy or a football club between the ages of 16 to 20, you're already classed as being in the elite of your country. Now, when those kids hit 21, 67% of those fall out of the game completely. So you think 67%?
Well, not into lower league. They just fall out. Don't kick.
No, they're not in the game at all. They're not in the game at all. I'm talking not in League One, not in League Two.
Wow.
Probably not in the conference. Not getting out of the game completely. Now they might be playing for your local football team.
Yeah.
In terms of any competitive
Professional football
league, they're not. So I think there's got to be a support network there, because you imagine at 21 years old, you've been in an academy since you've been 7 or 8. Football's all you've ever known. You've had your family ferry you around the country for the best part of 15 years. So there's a massive commitment on your family side as well. And then you get released by a football club and you fall out of the game. At 21, you probably haven't earned enough money to sit and say, well, I can go, like I say, plough myself into a 3-year degree and go in this direction. You're probably going to sit at home and say, well, right, I haven't got much money in the bank. Football's all I've ever known. I've got no other qualifications. Where do I go from here? And people will want, and that's where you get the self-doubt of, where do I belong in society? And if people can't see that that's wrong, and that there needs to be a support mechanism in place for these younger players and the senior pros as well, the ones that are going to be out of contract here. But more importantly, between the ages of 16 and 21, 67% of those elite, we're talking elite, they're already in the elite kids are not in the game at 21. And something needs to be done. And like I say, whether it's too strong for the PFA or another governing body to step in and say, well, you have to achieve certain grades, else you don't play.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think that's very, very valid. And our friend or one of your former teammates, John Dempster, I'm pretty certain that when he was a teenager, I think it was Spurs wanted him, and I think his parents made him finish sixth form over in Corby before. And obviously he's still gone on and he's still had a very good career as a league player, and he's now obviously in coaching. But for them it was very much about education, and he's a clever cookie as well. From the PFA, so I'm right in thinking here then that there's no sort of money management, or there's no. The reason I say that, I had this perception that the PFA really looked after their members, if you like, and helped you with whether it be soft skills or preparing for life after football, etc. Clearly they don't. Mercedes Formula One team over at Brixworth Brackley Way, they have an apprenticeship scheme. So they bring in 38 apprentices from across the country every year. And for the first, I think they start off at 18 grand a year, then it goes up to 27, then 36. It's a 3-year apprenticeship program. But what they do is that in the first year, you house share. So I think there's 4 people. But they provide you with money management, DIY and cooking courses. So, you know, when I first heard that, I was like, oh, okay, let's hear a bit more about that. And then when you look at it, that these are 17, 18-year-old, typically males, but they do have female apprentices there as well. And they've been taken away from their family home, all they've ever known, because these are recruited from around the country, similar in a way, a bit like to football, but they're given this schooling, if you like, in terms of this education around looking after your money, looking after the house, looking after yourself in terms of the food that you consume. Whereas I suppose with footballers, it's very much, whilst it's similar, it's very much different because you're just in this bubble where I suppose you don't have to worry about what you're eating because it's provided for. You've got a doctor on site. You, from a medical perspective, the club does everything for you. So you're in this bubble, but then when that bubble pops, whether you're 28, 30, 35, you're just left on your own.
It doesn't, like I say, it's difficult for me to comment now in terms of what's going on today. I can only sort of comment on my journey with it. But certainly my football career didn't prepare me for life after professional sport, if you like.
How hard was the adjustment, David, from, I mean, you don't have to go into the specifics if you don't want to, but in terms of what you were earning compared to your first sort of job after football, I would imagine there's quite a few noughts missing from each, but how hard was that to adjust for that first 12, 18 months?
It's very, very difficult then. And my football career didn't prepare me at all for the real world. So for example, just to touch on your comment there, from the age of 16, when I left school and went full time, if you needed to see a club doctor for, I don't know, flu type symptoms or whatever it may be, there'll be a doctor on site 2 or 3 days a week at the training ground that would see you instantly, write your prescription, and on you go. You go and collect it from the pharmacy. And if you've got a dental problem, you'll get sent to the club. You know, the club will be affiliated with a dentist. You'll get sent straight there. You're straight in, you're straight out. You know, I suffered with some real bad injuries in my career, which ultimately ended my career in the end. But for example, you need to go for an MRI scan or an ultrasound scan or an X-ray. You'll walk straight into the private hospital. You'll get X-ray scanned immediately. You'll see your consultant within 20 minutes of your scan being done. They'll give you a breakdown of what's going on, and then you leave. And then when you sort of come out of that bubble, and I didn't go. I think I went to the doctors last year for the first time in probably 6 years since I retired. And I'm sat there in the waiting room, and I'm thinking, well, how do they know when? Like, why am I waiting here? Like, what's going on? Why is there 25 people sat in this waiting room? And it's because you're not prepared for that. And that's the real world, and that's what football doesn't prepare you for. And football needs to do more in preparing people for the real world, because unless you're, I don't know, a Wayne Rooney that's, you know, earned 300 grand a week for 10 years, the chances are a high percentage of footballers will have to work again. And in terms of money management and all the rest of it, more does need to be done, because you can earn some good salaries in football, not just in the Premier League, but outside that as well. But you get a lot at an early age, and you think it's lasting forever and it's coming forever, and all it takes is that one injury or that one bad tackle, and it's all ripped away from you. So for me, my mindset would be to any young player, you have to work hard and you have to dedicate yourself, because to be a professional footballer, you need a little bit of everything. To make it as a pro, you need a little bit of everything. So you need to dedicate yourself, you need to work hard, you need a little bit of luck along the way. You need to be in the right place at the right time. For example, I don't want to go off piece here, but for example, when I made my debut for Rushden, as a 17-year-old kid against Wrexham in the Football League, I got a phone call on a Saturday morning, bearing in mind the game was at 3 o'clock, saying that I was in the first team squad. And I thought, oh, right, brilliant, maybe on the bench, or I'll just be involved just to be in and around it. I got to the ground and I was starting. And the manager pulled me just before and he said, I can't remember exactly who it was. One of the senior pros went sick that night with a stomach bug or what have you. So because of that little bit of luck and someone else's misfortune, that person falling ill, I was drafted into the squad. And then the manager said, well, actually, let's chuck him straight in. And from that day, Ben, I made my debut. and I didn't look back. I stayed in the first team ever since, and then they then sold me on to Luton and so on and so on. So yes, I worked hard and dedicated myself from an early age. Yes, I had talent from an early age, but I also needed that little bit of luck, which was that one per, who knows.
And it's the same in business. It doesn't matter what industry you're in or where you're based geographically or what sector. I think every business person out there or can say that there'll be that one deal maybe, or there'll be that one event that's happened where they say, do you know, I was in the right place at the right time when I met that person or when I met that client. And again, it's another example of how professional sport, being an individual and succeeding in a team game, and being an individual in business and succeeding as a team, as a company. Okay, mate, listen, I've learned quite a bit today on this, some of which is shocked me, if I'm honest, as I'm sure it will to a few people that are watching it. But we're going to end on a real positive. So, Hudson, for those of you that don't follow David and his son on social media, Hudson is a little superstar in the making. He's got a lot of talent. Tell us about next gen coaching and what you've been up to with Hudson over this lockdown period, David.
Yeah, so obviously being in lockdown, I've had an opportunity to spend some quality time with him, and we've sort of been at the parks, and I've sort of been doing some one-on-one training with him, really. And if I'm honest with you, I fell out of love with the game a long time ago. For various different reasons, really, and I felt a little bit bitter towards it, politics, injuries, etc. But just being with him over the last sort of 6-7 weeks, training, getting back out on the grass, so to speak, for a cliche, if you like, it sort of reignited my love for the game, and just seeing his little face on how much he loves the game has brought my love back. And I'm thinking to myself that to be a professional footballer at any level, now, to be brutally honest, he's showing unbelievable signs of talent for a 6-year-old kid. Some that I've not seen much of, if I'm honest with you. But the reality is, he won't make it as a professional footballer at any level, because it's the elite of the elite of the elite that make it. Now, I will support him and guide him the best way I can. But the difficulty that parents have is that any child that shows a little bit of talent and a little bit of ability, they automatically think they're going to be the next James Maddison or the next Jack Grealish. And the gut-wrenching reality is that they won't. And I think to myself, over maybe 20 years in full-time football, I've played under some terrific coaches and some terrific top managers. I've gained a lot of sort of invaluable knowledge, really. And to answer your question, next gen coaching, I've set up a coaching site, and I'm going to target it sort of doing one-to-ones and sort of small group sessions, and I'm just going to try and pass on as much knowledge as I can to sort of the next generation to inspire them, to develop them, because one big thing, and something I'm really passionate about, is you're not only developing the footballer or the talent, you're developing the individual. And I think that comes first. Yeah. I think that's the first part. You develop the individual, and we've spoke many times before, football is one of the most cutthroat and ruthless industries there is. And if I can pass on some of my knowledge and experiences and the reality of the game in terms of the hard work, the dedication that you need to put in, that scary start of you're in the elite at 16 to 20, 67% fall out of the game completely, and you're already in the elite. So that sort of tells you how difficult it is. So it's reignited my passion for the game. If I can help the next generation, and you know what, it might be some parents that have got talented kids in an academy already, and they want a little bit of advice. They might come to me and say, Dave, what do you think about this? Or, John's had a bit of a dip in form lately. He's struggling with this. Can you help him out with this? And I'll do everything that I physically can to try and help that individual, whether that be a little bit of advice off the pitch, whether that be a little bit of work on the pitch if they're struggling in a certain area. Well, okay, let's target that area and let's get you better at that. And one thing that I'm a big advocate for, especially with the younger players, is I'm not interested in how many mistakes they make. I encourage mistakes. I encourage failure, because that's the only way you get better. No one's perfect, and you cannot strive. You cannot get perfection. It doesn't exist. Perfection don't exist. But what you do is you progress over perfection. And if you're progressing, whether that be baby steps, big steps, or huge steps, progression is progression. And that's the angle I'm coming at, is develop the individual, progress on a daily basis. And if I can offer some advice along the way on some of the experiences that I've been through, then why not? That's my aim. It's not my sole purpose. I've got a job and all the rest of it.
Listen, I think it's music to my ears, and I think looking at this from the business perspective, I go and make mistakes. There he is, the main man. Hello, Hudson.
Hello.
Hi. All right, mate. I make mistakes every day. My team would probably say that I make mistakes most hours of the day, but it's what you learn from it. And the one thing that I've never stopped doing since the day I left school is learning each week. So on that note, David, thank you for your time. I know you're busy, mate. But again, this has been a really insightful chat. I've certainly learned a lot, so I really appreciate it. We'll put all of the details up there for Next Gen Coaching. Obviously, anybody watching this, please do contact David. You can find him on LinkedIn, or we're going to stick up the Instagram handle now. Message him, get in contact. David, all the best, mate. Keep in touch, and I'll be over to see you and Hudson soon.
Thanks, mate. Take care.